Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm RJ Turcotte, Nantucket Waterkeeper, as part of the Nantucket Land Council, and very thrilled to welcome all of you to our second installment this summer of Clean Water Topics on Tap. I'd like to thank the Nantucket Land Council's Water Fund Founder Circle, whose support of our water fund helps to make all of these great programs we hold possible. For those who aren't familiar with our work, the Land Council is a nonprofit environmental advocacy organization that has been working to protect and preserve Nantucket's natural resources from land to water since 1974. We have a strong focus on the island's fragile water resources, from our incredible sole source aquifer to our freshwater ponds, our coastal wetlands, salt marshes, harbors, and the surrounding Atlantic Ocean. We're very interested in promoting good government policies to preserve these resources and educate the community on a variety of local environmental issues. As part of our new partnership with the Waterkeeper Alliance, the Land Council has adopted a jurisdictional area for our Waterkeeper program that includes the water surrounding the island, just about 1 nautical mile offshore, as well as the full extent of Nantucket Sound, all the way to Hyannis from here. So with that in mind, today's topic is Sandbar Sharks. Who are they? What are they up to? And why do we care? And this study is really important to the Land Council because sharks are an apex predator, especially here on Nantucket as compared with the rest of New England. There's not a lot known about them. So this will be a really thrilling and interesting presentation this evening. Before I introduce our excellent speaker, a word on our Zoom protocol. After the presentation, we will allow time for questions, a question and answer session. Should you have a question, please type it into the Q&A box, which you'll find on the bottom of your Zoom window. And so with that, without further ado, I would like to introduce Ms. Caroline Collatos, who is a longtime Nantucket resident and an established shark researcher, to talk about her work this summer on sandbar sharks in and around Nantucket. So take it away, Caroline.
First of all, thank you, RJ. That was a wonderful introduction and a beautiful introduction to our lovely island, Nantucket. So I'm going to quickly share my screen with you guys so that you can see this presentation that I've put together. If I can get that. Awesome. So hopefully everybody can see this presentation, and I just wanted to thank everybody for joining this talk today. I'm always happy to talk about my research in sharks, so it's amazing to have so many people interested in this. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So our talk is titled Investigating Presence and Habitat Use of Sandbar Sharks, Carcharodontis plumbeus, around Nantucket, Massachusetts. Basically, we're trying to figure out sandbar sharks. Who are they? What are they doing? Why are they here? And why do we care? So, sorry. Having a slide issue. 1 second, please. There we go. So what will we cover today? Our first topic that we're going to talk about is basically Nantucket. What do we know about Nantucket and the fishes around Nantucket? Then we're going to go into what is a sandbar shark. Then we're going to follow up by what is our proposed research plan? So what are we planning to do around the island? And lastly, we're going to talk about what we hope to find out with that plan and the importance of this. So Nantucket, a lot of us are familiar with the island, and for those of you who are not, Nantucket is one of our islands around Massachusetts, and it's located 30 miles out to sea from the Cape area. You can see it up here in this right-hand figure with the star denoting the center of the island or town. Nantucket's really interesting because it has these different bodies of water surrounding the island. So we have the Nantucket Sound between the island and Martha's Vineyard and the Cape. And then additionally, we have Nantucket Shoals, which are located kind of on the south side of the island, which you can see in the lower image. And lastly, we have the Gulf of Maine current coming through, which brings really cold, nutrient-rich water to this area. So these different kind of bodies of water host really rich biodiversity, both terrestrially and aquatically. So Nantucket fish species, what do we know about the fish in the area? And we're mostly going to focus on finned fish species. And what I mean by finned fish are fishes with fins rather than shellfish, which would be something like an oyster or a clam. So Nantucket has a range of habitats for multiple different species. We have eelgrass communities around the island and inshore on the island, which host animals like pipefish, killifish, sea robins. We have nearshore waters, which host animals like smooth dogfish, stripers, bluefish, black sea bass, porgies, other shark species as well. And then we have our offshore waters, which host animals like makos, threshers, tunas, and even big marine mammals like whales. And so all these different various various habitats host a wide range of recreational and commercial fishing. And there's a large community on the island that's based back into the days of whaling, of fishing and living kind of off the ocean. Additionally, there's a lot of various institutions researching these finned fish in the area. There's work on stripers, on cods, on American eels, on bluefin tuna, on herring, and on shad. But what about sharks? What kind of work in the area is done on sharks? So, shark research in Massachusetts. What do we know that's already happening in our area? Back in 1998 to 2002, Dr. Greg Scommel did a study in the Cape Cod and Martha's Vineyard area, which defined the coastal Massachusetts waters as a shark nursery habitat. What we mean by nursery habitat is that there were basically a lot of juvenile or baby sharks in this example using this area. So it's a nursery in the sense that these babies live there and they kind of seek these areas to get shelter from their predators. And these areas allow them to grow and then eventually reach sexual maturity and allow them to reproduce and help shark populations. So he did this study mostly in the Cape and Martha's Vineyard, and this was all based off of fishing. And this was about 20 years ago, but it was really important to define what species were in the area and how they were potentially using the habitat. It kind of opened up all these questions of shark activity in the Nantucket area and Martha's Vineyard and Cape. Additionally, there's the White Shark Conservancy, which Dr. Greg Scommel works with as well, and they focus on white sharks around the Cape, very specifically in that their habitat around the Cape Cod area. There's also the New England Aquarium, which does work along the Cape and in Boston Harbor. They've studied the nursery area in that general kind of vicinity for sand tiger sharks. Woods Hole does work, but they do work very, very far offshore, probably like 50 miles offshore, so pretty far offshore. And additionally, there's O-Search in the area, but they do not fish in Massachusetts waters. They don't do any research in Massachusetts waters. So again, they're not focused right around Nantucket. Lastly, there is the NOAA Cooperative Shark Tagging Program. And this is basically a program that any fisherman, whether you're recreational or commercial, can join. And if you're catching sharks, you can voluntarily deploy tags for them. I will talk a little bit more about this in a couple slides, but it's not a research project focused on shark activity around Nantucket and in Nantucket Sound. So we have research on sharks in Massachusetts, but we have a really large lack of research focused on shark activity around Nantucket. And additionally, we're seeing a lot of sharks around Nantucket, and there's a lot of shark fishing around Nantucket as well. And there have been sightings of sand tigers and sandbars, sand tigers, duskies, white sharks, but we're really seeing a lot of sandbar sharks. So we decided to study sandbar sharks. So who are sandbar sharks? Their scientific name is Carcharinus plumbeus, but that's kind of a mouthful. So we're just going to go with sandbar sharks for the presentation. They're circumglobal, meaning they're found in different oceans around our world. And they're warm water species, meaning they like warm water and they're not going to be in cold water areas. In the Western Atlantic, they range from Massachusetts to Brazil. So we are actually in one of their northernmost territories for their habitat range. They use coastal habitats. They use a lot of estuaries and bays. And they're migratory species. So they're going to overwinter in areas south of where they potentially may go during the summer. They get to be about 2.3 meters maximum. So that's about 6.5 to 7 feet. And they can live for over 30 years in the wild. And they don't reach sexual maturity until they're about 15 years old. So they can't reproduce until they're around 15. So that's a pretty late stage for reproduction. Additionally, there are keystone predators. I will define what a keystone predator is in a slide or two, but they eat fishes, they eat invertebrates like blue crabs, clams, and they eat other sharks, and they do eat rays and skates. They are prey to larger shark species, especially when they're younger. As they get larger, their predators kind of reduce, but when they're younger, they're very vulnerable to being predated upon by other shark species. What's really unfortunate is that their stocks have been overexploited, and along the Western Atlantic, they have reduced by 80%. And this is due to overfishing of the species for their large fin and for their meat. And it's caused them to be recreationally and commercially protected and prohibited, but also for their population to decline to such a number that they're listed as vulnerable on the IUCN list. And basically what the IUCN list is a database that anyone can go online and type in any species, and it will give you their population status across the world. So if you were to go in and type in, megalodon, it would say extinct. And if you were to go in and type in sandbar shark, it would say vulnerable. And so that's a good way to get kind of the stock status of this population or other species populations around the world. So what do we know about sandbar sharks on Nantucket? So we know from fishery data that we're catching juveniles, not mature individuals, and adults, mature individuals, in the nearshore habitats. Again, these are not pelagic water species, they're coastal habitat species. And we're catching them near shore and actually onshore. We know that they're probably around from June through September. There's potential for them to have annual return to these areas. And there's the potential for this area to be a nursery area, which we talked about earlier with Dr. Greg Scomel's original study. However, all of this information is based on fishery-dependent data. And what I mean by fishery-dependent data is that we are dependent on fishing for that shark to get that information. So we don't know what the sharks are doing when we're not trying to catch them. We don't know where they're going or if they're staying in the same area when we're not trying to catch them. All of our information is related to only when we are actively trying to catch the species. So what's my project? What's my plan for sharks around Nantucket and specifically sandbar sharks? So we're basically going to describe the demographics of sandbar sharks caught around the island in further detail. So we want to know, what are these life stages that we're seeing? Are we seeing mostly juveniles? Are we seeing mostly adults? Are we seeing even ratios between males and females? Do we see mostly females? Do we see pregnant females? Basically kind of describe who's here. We also want to describe the habitat use of sandbar sharks around the Nantucket Island and within the Sound. Where do they go? Why are they going to those places? Does that differ between a juvenile and an adult? Do things like temperature, tide, photo period, which is daylight length, depth, does that affect or influence their habitat use? Do they return to the same habitats within the same day, within the same months, maybe within the next year? So we want to kind of decipher all these nitty-gritty questions and really figure out what they're doing and why. And lastly, with one of our methodologies that we're going to use for this project, we're going to actually be able to detect other tagged animals around Nantucket. And that's going to help us understand the biodiversity that Nantucket hosts and who's around and when they're around. And again, that's going to be through an independent fishing method. So when we're not actively fishing for these animals. So why did we choose sandbar sharks to study? Why not a different species? So they're caught semi-frequently and sighted around the island. pretty regularly. And that's a really good and important thing to understand, is not only do they have a large presence around the island, but we can actually tangibly access this animal to answer these questions feasibly. And besides white sharks and dusky sharks, sandbar sharks are one of the top predators inshore. And they are keystone predators in the sense that they play an important role in maintaining food webs and balanced ecology. And since sandbar sharks are somewhat, sharks aren't always the best cuddly example to work with, we're going to actually give an example of sea otters. So I want everyone to imagine we're on the coast of California and we have our fluffy, cute little sea otter who eats sea urchins, and sea urchins eat sea kelp. And so back in the day, sea otters were overhunted for their meat and their pelts. And so since their numbers were declined so significantly, the sea urchins predators were reduced so they could just reproduce and proliferate. So there were tons and tons and tons of sea urchins. And basically they were eating all the kelp so quickly that the kelp could not keep up fast enough with those sea urchins. And so basically the kelp kind of fell apart and deteriorated. And we noticed that basically the entire ecosystem, all the other animals that relied on that kelp were no longer had a home or a house or a home or food or an area to kind of thrive in. And so this whole ecosystem fell apart because you took that apex predator out, which is our sea otter in this circumstance. And so besides white sharks and dusky sharks, sandbar sharks play a role as the sea otter around Nantucket. So hopefully that gives you a little bit more of a tangible idea of the importance of having sharks around, and especially this species around our island. Additionally, since there was such a previous population decline, it's really important to monitor the habitats that this species uses and their populations to know if they're rebounding or they're having further declines. And if we don't monitor their habitats, then how will we know where they're going? And we can't also then help their population. So hopefully I haven't bored you guys too much with science jargon so far. And so now we're going to talk about the fun part, which is how we're actually going to do all of this. So we're going to do this through fishing and acoustic telemetry. And I will describe what acoustic telemetry is in a minute. And again, this is through fishery dependent methods where we're depending on fishing to catch the shark, and fishery independent methods where we're not going to be actually fishing and getting data from the animal. So it's pretty cool in my eyes. So when we catch fish, we're going to be catching them and fishing for them from boat and shore. When we catch an animal, we ID the species, the sex, and we measure it to get the estimated size so that we can figure out where it is on that age range. Is it, right before sexual maturity, after, etc. We ID them with a tag provided by NOAA. And if you remember, I mentioned that NOAA cooperative shark tagging program. So we do get these external dart tags, which you can see in this photo, and we place them below the dorsal fin into that musculature of the shark. And these have specific numbers, which we then relay the information to NOAA saying, hey, we tagged this sandbar shark in X area on this day, and it was this size. And then if that shark is actually recaptured, NOAA sends us this back, which is basically the information of our shark's recapture. So we can see where it was recaptured, when it was recaptured, and maybe if it grew within that time, and how long that shark was at liberty. And this can give us 2 points of data on the shark's habitat use, potential migration routes, and potential growth. But again, this is really only 2 points of data. And this is only dependent on if that fisherman who catches the shark can recognize that tag and is curious enough to look up what it is or already knows what it is and then reports that information. We're also going to be implanting acoustic tags, which is what I mentioned called acoustic telemetry. And I'm going to describe that in a second. And then we remove the hook of the shark and we release the individual. We time this process because we really want this to be a fast, efficient process. since we're trying to study these animals, we're really not trying to harm them or stress them out in any way. And we also go through rigorous kind of protocols to get these procedures permitted through proper scientific permitting and approved through institutional animal care procedures. So this is some cool pictures of working up some sharks across basically on a boat, or you could do this on land too, I guess, or on shore. But if the shark is small enough, we can simply just quickly bring that shark out of the water to get a quick measurement, or put it in a tub where we're actually able to measure it in a tub of water. And if the shark is too large, we just secure it by the side of the boat and are able to work with the animal off the side of the boat, so we can still get that data from the animal. So acoustic telemetry, this was the other way we're going to be studying our species. And acoustic telemetry is a pretty cool method, and it basically works with acoustic tags pinging and acoustic receivers listening. So kind of like cell phones and cell phone towers. So each tag is individually coded and they ping at a frequency of kilohertz. So sharks and humans cannot hear this with our naked ear, you may say. We need machines to be able to hear the tag actually pinging. And these tags are constantly pinging. And so within that, when that shark has that tag on it and it's swimming around, and we place these listening devices or receivers in the area, it's detected by these different receivers. Our tags last about 4 to 7 years, so we're able to get multiple years of data, and we plan to deploy up to 20 this summer. If you see on the right-hand side upper picture, that is what looks like a big black water bottle, and that is our listening device, our receiver. And then below that is a picture of our tag, which just kind of looks like a gray battery. And we want to basically refer it to a AA battery because it's not much larger than AA battery. So it's pretty small, and it actually only weighs about 12 grams. So when we put this on the animal, it's really not hindering their swimming ability. And we choose animals that are over a certain size so that we make sure this tag is like, you know, it's kind of giving them a little piercing and it won't affect any of their behavior at all. So I'm a pretty visual person, and I think acoustic telemetry is better visualized. So I put together this little display to show you guys how it works. So we have our Sandbar Shark here, and we have that little black marker on the shark, which denotes our tag, and those red lines, which symbolize the tag pinging on that kilohertz frequency. And then we have our receiver that we've deployed in the area, across from the shark. And so we're actually going to see this shark start swimming and the tag is pinging constantly. But once it gets within range of the receiver, which is constantly listening, records the date and the exact time down to the seconds and the tag code that it heard at that time. So we're just going to replay that for you guys. You can see once the shark's not within range, it's not detected. Once it gets within range of that receiver, it is detected, and we get that written down or that recorded information. So we're in the process of deploying 14 of these listening devices or these receivers around the island, which I've denoted in yellow. As you can see on the right-hand lower side, we have our island with 14 yellow stations around it, and 15 within the Nantucket Sound. These receivers can hear up to 800 meters. So if that shark is within 800 meters of that receiver, it should be detected. And we're in the process of deploying them currently now, June through November. So we're actually going to haul these in the winter, so that basically we can get all of that information back that the receivers have recorded. And if you look to the right-hand side, you'll see this large yellow structure. That is one of the yellow buoys that we're going to be deploying off the south side of the island. So if you are on island and you see one of those off one of the south side beaches, that is one of our listening devices to hear these animals. Additionally, what's really, really cool about this methodology is that basically any other researcher who uses the same acoustic tag type, their tag can be detected on any receiver deployed in the area, because all of the researchers in the area and along the entire US East Coast, throughout the country and throughout most of the world, use this one company who creates this tag type. So we're able to actually basically data share, and if my sharks were to travel to a different receiver that I have not deployed, that researcher will tell me that. So there are receivers deployed from the White Shark Conservancy and the Mass Department of Marine Fisheries in the area as well, which I've noted in this figure in white. So we're actually having, we have even more of an array of these listening devices than we individually are putting out. Again, since we have this kind of monopoly on this tag type, or this company who creates this tag type, there are these different networks that these scientists join called the ACT and FACT network, which we basically agree to say, if you detect my animal, I tell you, and if I detect your animal, you tell me, and we don't use each other's data for our own benefits. And if you see, I stole this figure from the ACT network, but you can see an entire, these blurbs of arrays down the coastline. So we're actually able to then get data on our sharks when they leave our own array, which is pretty cool in my eyes. And what's kind of cool about it is, for my master's research, we looked at Sandbar Sharks use in South Carolina in one local bay. And through those joined telemetry networks, we were able to get their migration patterns. So I wanted to just show you guys this little display of some of the migration routes we collected. This is for one individual that we tagged in Winyah Bay, South Carolina. And this basically is just a way to show you that even if our sandbar sharks migrate out of the area, we can still actually collect data on where they're going when they're not around our island. So these little yellow beacons represent the receivers that our shark in this circumstance was detected on. And she's going to travel down the coastline. And when she hits those different receiver arrays, we're going to have the time that she migrated to that area light up on the right. And so we can actually see she traveled all the way down to Florida, and she overwintered there, came back up to the Georgia and South Carolina area, and traveling a whole distance of 515 kilometers estimated, which is pretty cool. So we're basically kind of stalking and tracking these sharks wherever they go. So what have we done so far? In the past year, we've done some fishing. And we know from other previous data as well, from Dr. Skolmel and from other fishermen around the island, that there are older juveniles and adults present in these nearshore and coastal areas. We know there may be potential differences in the habitats between these juveniles and adults, but this is really preliminary data. So we do not have enough to strongly suggest this. And that's something we really want to further investigate. We also have pretty fast fights by that. And what I mean by fast fights are that the shark is only on the hook and line for an average of 4 minutes. Our maximum was about 6 minutes. And we time our tagging time, and that was about 1 to 2 minutes. So this process is over within 10 minutes from when the shark takes our hook to when it's released with our tags. And that's because we really want our fish to be as impacted and as least stress as possible. We're not trying to harm the animal that we're trying to study and further protect. And right now we're in the process of deploying those receivers, those listening devices around the island and within the sound. And we have all of our tags and gear in order. We just need the sharks pretty much. So hopefully you guys are still with me, but basically what are we trying to discover with all this? So kind of looping this all back to what are our main research questions with this? So again, we really want to look at the presence and the potential residency and, potential annual returns of these sharks in the area. Where are they going? How often are they there? Are they coming back every year? Trying to answer those questions. We want to look at the factors influencing their habitat use. What potentially affects it? Does nothing affect it? Does it affect it for different age groups? We want to collect that fishery independent information on other species in the area. So since all these receivers can listen and hear other people's sharks or other animals tagged with this tag type, we can actually collect information on species like white sharks, dusky sharks, sand tigers, sea turtles, marlins, animals that potentially would swim by that receiver array. And then basically add that information with those researchers' approval to saying what other marine animals does Nantucket host. And we collect that information, again, not through fishing from those animals, but just through listening for them since they've been tagged by other researchers. And we also plan to deploy more tags, more receivers, and we have more specific research questions that we want to address in the future. So lastly, what is kind of the conservation importance of all this? Why is this even worthwhile to do? So it's really important to document and conserve local habitats to aid in population rebounds. If we don't know where they're going and we don't know what habitats they're using, then we can't protect those habitats, and then they can't use them to basically grow older, reproduce, and grow their population. It's really important to also understand the role these animals play in our food web and our local ecology. So if you remember our otter example, if we take sandbar sharks out of the picture, are we going to see changes in bluefish numbers, stripers, other things like that? And is that going to have a cascading effect down to other species in the area? It's also really important to add to broader population information and stock status. So since no one's really looked at sandbar sharks specifically on Nantucket, that's kind of a gap in our knowledge about sandbar sharks along our US East Coast. And maybe they're using the habitats differently. Maybe they have different migration patterns from other groups of sandbar sharks that are using different habitats. And lastly, what's really, really cool about this project is that this is the start of baseline data for sandbar sharks in Nantucket. And so basically without a start of baseline data, you can't compare anything in the future. You can't compare if there are changes or if things have been going the same way. So this baseline data will allow us for future comparison and habitat use, abundances, presence, like things like that, annual returns. Do we see differences? Do we see more individuals coming in further years? Is that an indication of populations rising? Questions like that. And additionally, as humans continue to build on our coastal habitats, we have what's called habitat degradation. So if we see a large, habitat of sandbar sharks, let's say they are all kind of hanging around one beach, and all of a sudden a multi-million-dollar mansion or resort goes up in that area, will that then affect that sandbar shark population that relied on that habitat? And lastly, as our ocean's waters warm, over time, this acoustic array can be one of the first identifying arrays on our coastline to see if sandbar sharks or other species that this is their northernmost habitat range start moving further north as our Gulf of Maine currents warm. Other scientists have seen presence of southern species of sharks moving further north as our waters warm. So we could also potentially start detecting species from the south that never usually came up here, but as we increase our water temperature, have their habitat has now expanded and they're able to come up further north. So with that, there are tons of people I would love to acknowledge. This has been a huge group process so far. We would not have gotten where we were or where we are without everyone listed on this page. This is in no particular order, but everyone has been so crucial to making this project happen. Everyone from the fishermen and volunteers to the New England Aquarium, where I'm currently a PhD student, to the Nantucket Land Council, Inova Seas, who's offering us, loaning us gear to be able to listen or hear these animals. Nantucket, the town harbor master, Sheila Lucy, who's been super helpful, Matticat Marine, who's helped me build the moorings, Sea Streak Ferries, White Shark Conservancy, Anderson Stillwater's Moorings, and Lobster and Dan Pronk. Everyone has been so helpful. And I'm just so grateful for this kind of collaborative effort to really further our understanding of Nantucket's at least shark populations and also hopefully biodiversity with that special methodology we're using. So lastly, I just want to say, if there are any questions, all questions are good questions, and I'm always happy to talk about sharks and my research. So thank you guys so much. I will turn it over to RJ.
All right. Thank you so much, Caroline. Amazing presentation. So I'd just like to reiterate to everyone listening that your Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom window, no question is a bad question as far as Caroline's presentation and about sharks. This is you folks' opportunity to ask an expert, and it's a shark expert, no less. So definitely use that wisely. That doesn't happen every day. So with that, I think we'll get started with the Q&A session. Caroline, if you're ready.
Yeah. Can you guys, I hope you can hear me.
They're already piling up. So,
yay.
So let's start with one that I think is super valid when I think of some of the juvenile sandbar shark pictures I've seen that you've sent along and have in your presentation. An audience member asked, what is the difference between a dogfish and a sandbar shark? They look so much alike.
That's a great question. A lot of shark species look very similar, and it can add to a lot of confusion when scientists or recreational fishermen or citizen scientists are trying to identify them. So a big factor with dogfish versus sandbar sharks are sandbars have a very large dorsal fin, and that is the first fin on the shark. Additionally, I don't recommend you try to discover if the shark is this species, but in this manner, but sandbar sharks do have pointy, sharp teeth that could hurt you, whereas dogfish have kind of smooth, serrated, like more like molar-like teeth. So you could actually grab their jaw and not actually be bitten in the sense that you think you'd be bitten by a shark. Another factor is their tail and their size. Dogfish only get to be about 1 meter, 1.3 meters, so around 4 feet maximum, whereas sandbar sharks can be up to 6.5 or 7 feet. So if you do see a fish that is measuring 5 feet or 6 feet, you can probably estimate that is not a dogfish. And additionally, there are multiple species of dogfish. So I'm more than happy to go over the nitty-gritties of identifying different species from one another, but those are the first things that come to mind.
All right, awesome. Next question for you. This one says, are they receivers anchored to the seafloor, or are they floating on or near the surface?
That's a great question and something I should have specified. And the receivers will be anchored the way you have a boat mooring. So the receiver location should ideally not change. Sometimes we do get crazy weather and that could potentially move that mooring. But with the receivers being in the same location, it's kind of like, let's say we have a receiver off Matticat Beach, so off the north side of the island or off the west side of the island versus the east side of the island off of Great Point. And again, for those of you who are not familiar with Nantucket, just imagine north and south side, west and east side. So since those receivers are in the same spot always, when they detect a shark coming to receiver on the west and receiver on the east, we can see maybe how they moved back and forth between those two spots. Our receivers don't log GPS points, so ideally we don't want them to move, and we just want to see how the sharks move within our stationary receivers.
Gotcha. Okay, next, this person said, I noticed that you have an acoustic device in the entrance to Nantucket Harbor. Have you detected any sandbar sharks in the harbor yet?
That is a great question. That receiver is not deployed yet. We're hoping to deploy that in the next couple weeks. We have plans to deploy the south side receivers next week. So that is one of the questions that I really want to be able to hopefully answer in the future, but unfortunately just don't have that information yet.
Okay. Are sandbar sharks the same, are sand sharks, sorry, the same as sandbar sharks?
Oh my gosh, I love these questions. So that brings up kind of a whole different topic of common names versus scientific names. If you remember, I said sandbar sharks are what we call Parkerinus columbius. And that's because you could take a smooth dogfish shark or a sandbar shark or maybe a sand tiger shark, and 3 different people could call each of those species sand shark. So a lot of the time people do refer to sandbars as sand sharks, but it's really, it's not quite, I'm not quite always certain what species they're talking about, because sometimes they're talking about that smooth dogfish, which was that first question, and I described the difference in their teeth and their size, or sometimes they're talking about sandbar sharks. And so it's kind of tricky to answer it, but that's the reason we have things called scientific names. So each species has its name no matter where it is in the world. So hopefully that answers that.
Okay. And these next 2, I'm actually going to group together for you because they're similar. Is there any other way to capture sharks besides fishing for them? And could you describe your safe fishing techniques for them? And also, does the pinging bother the shark's ears?
Oh, okay, great. So, okay, first off, pinging, it doesn't bother them. They actually can't hear it. So they hear on hertz frequencies, and this tag emits on kilohertz frequencies. So we can't, humans can't hear it. So I could literally have this tag on my shoulder all day for a whole year and just never hear it, and it would never bother me. And that's the exact same for sharks. So the first question, are there different ways to fish for sharks or catch them? There are ways to swim with them and not actively catch them, but dart them with one of these tags. Unfortunately, with the water quality around Nantucket, that's not very safe or feasible. There are other ways where you can visually locate them and kind of try to trap them in like a net. So you're actively not putting a hook in their mouth. Again, that can be really hard to do unless you have safe water conditions and visible conditions. And you also then have to be aware of all the other fish and animals that may swim into that net. And also, if that net is going to be dragging things up from the ocean, like crabs or algae that, you know, shouldn't be dragged up like that. So for safety protocols for our sharks, we only use legal regulations. So the hooks we use are all legal, and there have been scientific studies showing that the hook type we use is actually safer for the sharks and for fish in general. We again make sure that our bites or the time the shark is on the line is all time. And I'm really, really kind of rigorous about that. I want it down to the exact second. And we also have, I'm also participating in a different research project, which Mookie, if you would be able to pull up slide 2, that would be amazing. And this relates specifically to the health of our sharks that we're catching. So, Mookie, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. So this is a project in collaboration with Dr. Nick Whitney, Dr. Jeff Kneebone, and Dr. Greg Colmel. And they're looking at shore fishing from recreational fishermen at local anglers in the Nantucket, Martha's Vineyard, and Cape area, and looking at the effects of fishing for these sharks. So they use these fancy tags called accelerometer, which is that orange-looking float device on the shark fin. That's the dorsal fin, again, that first fin of the shark. And this is basically a Fitbit. It's kind of what we have in our phones, where it tracks our movement on a 3-dimensional axis. So then we can actually track the shark's behavior and swimming movements and potential effects related to this capture and release. The tag then pops off, and we're able to go and track down the tag, collect it, and get that data back. So we can say, hey, are our sharks swimming off fine? Are they agitated? Do they have mortality events afterwards? And this is really crucial to answering that question that you asked, which is, how is this affecting our sharks? Is it affecting your sharks? Is this a safe way? So this will help us understand if they're affected by it or if they're just kind of like, oh, that was weird, and keep swimming. So really quick thing, if you see one of these orange or red tagging packages on the water or on the island, if you're on island, please tell me, please, please, please tell me.
Okay. I noticed, Caroline, that first slide, this is a question that comes up pretty often, and that's how can you tell if it's a male or a female?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Mookie, if you wouldn't mind going to that first slide. Just like humans, you can always tell if a shark is a male or a female from its external anatomy. That is not the way with every fish. You cannot tell if some fishes are male or female just by looking at their body. And additionally, some fishes change sex in their lifetime and sharks do not. So if you caught a male shark, he will always be a male shark. And so this image shows kind of our shark anatomy. And so we have that top first dorsal fin. And then on the sides, we have what are called our pectoral fins. And then what's highlighted are our pelvic and anal fins. And if you were to flip the shark over, so you had it on its underside, you would see that the males have these appendages right by their pelvic fins called claspers, and females do not have those appendages. And if the shark was even in utero, you would be able to tell if it was male or female. So if you ever catch a shark and you're curious, just quickly flip it over, look for those appendages. If they're not there, it's a female. If they're there, it's a male.
Okay, cool. Next, what southern shark species are moving north?
So there's evidence potentially of blacktips coming up. And so blacktips don't range up in Massachusetts. That's not part of their natural habitat. But as we see our waters warming and the Gulf of Maine current especially warming, it's possible that we could see those species moving up north. And that's just one example. It's tricky. We don't want to make claims when we don't, we want to make sure we have enough evidence to make all these claims, but scientists are seeing suggestions of that.
Gotcha. And those receivers you're putting out and those transmitters you're putting on the sharks will help us to answer those questions as we go forward. So that's awesome. Next one, and this is a multi-parter. Excellent talk, Caroline! Exclamation point.
Thanks.
Wondering if dolphins, whales, etc. can hear the frequency that humans and sharks cannot. Also, do you have an outreach campaign of sorts to educate fishermen about how to recognize the tags on sharks and how to contact you if they find them?
So I'm going to start with the last one because it's a little simpler. No, I don't currently. We are just starting this. This is our first summer of deploying these tags and collecting this data. So that is something I would really like to develop, and an amazing idea, and I think a great way to promote education on sharks and just marine species in general. So thank you for bringing that up. Second off, dolphins and whales. So can they hear these tags? So sometimes the dolphins actually can hear these tags. Dolphins hear on much higher frequencies than humans and sharks do. However, it is not like dolphins and whales are actively seeking out these tag noises. And remember, you can't really hear these tags unless you're within 800 meters of them. So people all across the world use these tag types on sea turtles, sharks, plonks, lobsters, stripers, fluke, all different species. And if it were really affecting marine mammals listening and affecting their predation, we would definitely be seeing that with multiple different species in multiple areas. And there's just no evidence of that whatsoever. Additionally, if a dolphin does kind of swim up to a large sea turtle or white shark with this tag type, we'll probably be like, huh, that's weird. That's not what I was expecting, and swim away. So I hope that answers that question. There's really no evidence whatsoever of it influencing marine mammals' hearing or their behavior or predation or prey activity.
Okay, next, this person asked, why are there more receivers on the north and west side of the island off Dionis and Nantucket and Nantucket Harbor than on the east side off of Squam, etc.?
That's a great question. So part of that is just planning logistically. Where are safe areas we can actually get out there and put these big devices out. We're putting them on very, very heavy mooring equipment. So we want to make sure we can do this in a safe manner for us and for the boats. Additionally, again, this is just our first year, so we really want to expand that array to around Nantucket and include more receivers in that area. We hope with future, funds and grants and kind of progressing of this research, we will be able to do that. But again, this is just our first year, and this is actually the first time anyone has ever deployed any sort of mooring device off of, well, there was one other time, but it wasn't too successful. So this is the first time anyone's going to be deploying moorings or acoustic receivers off of the island on the south side. So we just want to start not huge and start with a feasible, safe way. But hopefully in the future, we will have them all over.
Okay. This question is asking, have you studied other species of sharks?
Yes, I have. And I bet you didn't know, this is just a cool fact, but there are over 500 species of sharks. Many people don't know that. And so I have studied a couple different species. One of my other current research projects, Mookie, actually, if you wouldn't mind bringing up slide 5, is with whale sharks. So we look at whale sharks use in a specific park in Panama. And we actually, since whale sharks are filter feeders, we actually don't catch these individuals in any way, but we actually free dive with them to identify them via photo. Each whale shark's markings are unique the way a cheetah's or giraffe's are and the way our fingerprints are. So if we photograph them in certain spots, we can actually say, hey, this was this individual we saw the other day. and then we can deploy some of those acoustic tags in that way. And what's really exciting too about that work is my collaborator from the Smithsonian Tropical Institute in Panama, where we conduct our work, is Coiba, which is a marine protected area and a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And it hosts so much biodiversity. But Dr. Hector Guzman, recently just got the park boundaries extended about last week or a week and a half ago. And so Panama now protects 30% of its oceans, which is amazing because these whale sharks really rely on this habitat, and they're threatened by illegal fishing activities and just a lot of other different impacts. So that's one other species I'm currently studying. And I've done work with a range of other different species that I'm always happy to talk about, but will not blab about right now.
All right. Awesome. Thank you so much, Caroline. We are hitting 6 o'clock here. So thank you so much for taking the time to educate us all this evening and taking on this new and important research for Nantucket. I'd like to thank once again the Water Founders Circle of members and all Water Fund supporters, as the Water Fund not only supports our Clean Water series for educational opportunities like this, but it's specifically helping Caroline to fund her research for Nantucket. As Caroline mentioned, she's still in need of some additional support, and the Land Council is accepting contributions from the community that can be restricted to specifically help Caroline in this Sandbar Shark research this year. So if you folks are interested in helping her out and making a donation, head on over to nantucketlandcouncil.org, head to the donate tab, donate in any amount you can, and then in the special instructions, just write shark research, and we'll know that that funding will go straight to Caroline to help her with this work. So thank you so much, everyone, for attending. Thank you, Caroline. And we hope to hear more about your data that you've collected over the summer real soon. Good night, everyone.